Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is very rare for someone like me to find themselves in this privileged position where you introduce your own mother. Umama Mary Robinson is mother to many, but first and foremost to me. And I want to challenge all the young girls in this room to claim their stake, because I'm not going to give space and move. I'm holding on for mentorship, and you get it for free. Mary Robinson is the president of the Mary Robinson Foundation for Climate Justice. She's been to us at Agriculture and Rural Development Day a beacon of hope. She has pushed for climate-smart agriculture. She has pushed for climate justice. But most important, she has pushed for gender equity. I just want to pick one of her many famous quotes, which I heard recently. According to Mama Mary, we as women think in time horizons that span the lives of our children and grandchildren. We cannot and should not, therefore, address issues of sustainability without harnessing the contribution of women. Close quote. Mama Mary Robinson is going to be addressing us this afternoon on science for the people, the climate justice approach. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much indeed, Lindiwe. You have a way of introducing people that makes them feel good. It is genuinely a pleasure for me to be back at this Agriculture and Rural Development Day, ARD, because I did very much enjoy the discussions in Durban. I would have got here earlier, but you all know what travelling in Rio is like. So there were some logistical complications in getting here, but I'm really happy to be here. And my colleague, Dr. Tara Shine, has briefed me a little bit about some of the earlier discussion. I was going to say anyway that I am not a climate scientist or even a very techie scientist. The mama suits, and it's more like grandmama now. I recall just very recently my 2 grandchildren were borrowing my iPad yet again to play games, and I watched their skill playing games. So I decided to teach them a game on my iPad. You know the card game Patience, where you set all the cards out and put them back into their set. And within 2 minutes, this 8- and 7-year-old had learned the game of Patience, which means you have to understand the cards and the numbers, etc. So I do believe that young people have advantages of the technologies. But from understanding the complexities of the climate system to creating the newest renewable energy technologies, science is key. Science informs our understanding of the climate, of crop production, of animal husbandry, and good nutrition. Science explains things we always knew to be true, but for a long time couldn't explain. Yet science isn't infallible. It is constantly evolving, improving, and, I hope, learning from its mistakes. I'd like to explore the extent to which science serves the people and suggest some ways in which we can maximize the benefits of science for society. Some science is done for the sake of scientific endeavour and academic exploration. Many would claim this to be the purest science. But science also finds solutions to real-world problems. How to increase soil fertility, how to cure a disease, or how to create energy without fossil fuels. Clearly, science plays a vital role in informing sustainable development. 20 years ago, scientists were among those informing the commitments taken by world leaders here in Rio, in the Rio Declaration and Agenda 21. Science inspired action and spurred ambition 20 years ago. The Earth Summit in 1992, as you well know, highlighted how science can serve the people and the planet. It set out to protect the planet and its resources, while aspiring for a world without poverty and social exclusion. But 20 years on, we have yet to demonstrate the full potential of science in this role as a driver of sustainable development, and we have not fulfilled and implemented the potential of the Rio Declaration. Science is often at its most powerful when it responds to people's needs. Unfortunately, people's needs don't fall into neat boxes, boxes called health or nutrition or water or forestry or agriculture or jobs. They are linked and are often inseparable. Yet we usually seek to address people's needs in categories or disciplines. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why we are yet to achieve our sustainable development objectives. I have in my mind today people I met yesterday. I was moderating a meeting of civil society, and I met a number of members of the Southern African Rural Women's Assembly. They know so much about what they need to change their lives, because they understand what it will take, and they're very articulate about it, from Mozambique, from South Africa, from Namibia. And listening to them, I felt, are we going to make a difference here in Rio to their lives in the near future? Are we actually going to make a tangible difference? To find effective solutions, science needs to respond to the complex and interlinked causes of poverty, climate change, and social exclusion. These issues are as much social as they are technical, economic, or scientific, and we respond most effectively when we consider them in an integrated manner. A new way of doing things requires us to listen to and understand people's needs. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. People are not the same, and their needs are not the same. But there are common threads, and we need to identify these and find more effective and innovative ways of responding. One way of doing this is through a climate justice approach. Just as sustainable development is based on a balance between the three pillars or the three legs of the stool of social, environment and economic development, climate justice is based on a linked approach between human rights, the impact of climate change and development. Climate justice is informed by science and grounded in human rights. It has a human-centred approach where the experience of people on the ground reinforces and corroborates scientific evidence. It responds to science while respecting and protecting established rights and striving for greater equity. Science can make lives better. New strains of rice allow farmers in Bangladesh to cultivate in brackish water, as I saw when I visited the area that had been flooded by a cyclone. And innovations in agroforestry, influenced by traditional practices, allow food to be produced while soils are conserved and fertilised. But science can also miss the point. For example, I've heard women from Mali complain when they were sort of gifted with cook stoves, and they said, we don't cook like that. Nobody asked us how we cook. And it was just a mismatch of good intentions, but it actually missed the point. Or you can find that a water pump may be very unsuited to women's needs. There are also fantastic examples of science meeting people's needs. Farmer-led research, for example, where farmers identify the problems to be solved and actively participate in the research. We heard some examples of that on the panel that I was on sustainable development, on food and nutrition, as part of the sustainable development panels yesterday evening. And farmer-to-farmer mentoring, where proven practices in one community can be shared with another through an equitable peer-to-peer relationship. The challenge facing the research community is to understand the issues facing rural and food insecure people around the world and to work across disciplines to find appropriate solutions. And if people are food insecure, you can bet your whatever it is that they're land insecure, because the two very often go together. That issue of land security, particularly for women who are the majority of smallholder farmers. The most innovative technology in the world won't improve a farmer's ability to earn a living and feed her family unless she has access to and control over resources such as land and water, access to extension services and credit, and an active role in decision making. Purely technical approaches don't in fact work. I've seen this in the health sector. I had the honour of chairing for a number of years the Gavi Alliance, where we were bringing vaccine technology, but that on its own would not be sufficient. And this applies equally in the context of agriculture, food and nutrition security, and climate change. If I take the example of nutrition, we know that undernutrition remains one of the world's most serious, but perhaps the least addressed, socioeconomic and health problems, hitting the poorest the hardest, especially women and children. In developing countries, nearly 1/3 of children are underweight or stunted, and undernutrition is the cause of more than 1/3 of under 5 child mortality. In order to address under and malnutrition, it's clear that we need to find ways to produce more food and improve access to a range of nutritious foods. So work developing new crop varieties, improving soil fertility and creating irrigation technologies is critical, especially in the light of the impacts of climate change. However, we also know that women and children are more susceptible to undernutrition due to lack of access to land, as I said, to clean water and to sanitation. In addition, cultural norms affect nutrition, with women and men eating after men, women and children, eating after men in many cultures, thereby missing out on one of the most nutritious components, of the meal. I heard the new president of Malawi, Sibanda, speak passionately about this issue when we were together recently in Washington. I was moderating a panel she was speaking at, and she spoke about changing those habits and the role of chieftains in the village in helping to change those kinds of habits so that women and children get the nutritional food and men understand that this is actually their role as protectors of their family, that they should in fact change the ordering of who eats and who eats the best parts of the most nutritious food. We also know that as women's workload increased, they have less time for preparing nutritious meals for their family. And sadly, as the impacts of climate change are felt more and more, women work longer and harder to collect firewood and water and to produce food, leaving less time for actual meal preparation. I say all of this to demonstrate the complexity of the issues that we're trying to solve and to illustrate the need for multidisciplinary approaches. We simply won't have the impact we hope for on nutrition if we don't empower women, combat climate change and achieve greater equity in the global food system. As my colleague Tara Shine knows, I am resisting invitations to join any new bodies because I have a fairly large workload. But I was very honoured and very willing when invited to join the lead group of the Scale Up Nutrition, because I wanted to actually be in that group in order to be among those who would highlight the gender dimensions and women's empowerment. And we formed a subgroup on gender and food and nutrition security and women's empowerment and role in food and nutrition security. A small but targeted piece of research which my foundation, the Mary Robinson Foundation Climate Justice, carried out recently in Malawi demonstrated the value improved access to sustainable energy can have on nutrition by making best use of women's time. Some improved stoves have the ability to store heat, which allows women to keep food warm for children so they can eat at intervals during the day, with benefits to their nutritional status. Likewise, sustainable energy can power water pumps and irrigation systems, which reduce the time women spend collecting water and free them up to prepare meals or tend to a kitchen garden and grow more nutritious food. I've seen estimates, and they've been quoted to me, that by 2050 there will be 24 million additional malnourished children, 21% more than today. I just don't accept that we can talk about 2050 and mal or undernourished children. I just don't accept that we can do that. It is not acceptable that we continue to have this very widespread failure to protect human rights, rights to food, rights to safe water, rights that all governments have been committing to. So I think we need to ensure that we don't drift into using figures for 2050 that talk about large numbers of malnourished children or terrible problems of the proportion of the 9 billion that it will be at that stage who will wake up hungry every morning, as about 1 billion people do in our world today. It is not acceptable. And Rio Plus 20 has to change that whole mindset and have us get real about implementing the human rights and that sense of being human in our world today. I still, think that the first part of the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says it all. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And actually dignity comes before rights. And dignity is very undermined when your children have starving bellies, when they die prematurely. There's no dignity in that. So what goes on afterwards and what has been built up in the international human rights movement draws from there. And we, with our principles of climate justice, are based naturally on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but we've also reached out to other principles. And one of the principles of climate justice that informs the work of my foundation is harnessing the transformative power of education and research. Education, as we know, is indispensable to the just society. And education that breaks down barriers between disciplines and facilitates interdisciplinary research and learning lends itself well to sustainable development. A climate justice approach provides a platform for linking the humanities and science, human rights and technological innovation. I was delighted in early 2009, it was just after the year where we marked the 60th anniversary of the Universal Declaration, and in January 2009, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS, launched a coalition to foster communication and partnerships on human rights among scientific associations and between the scientific and human rights communities. The coalition works to ensure that all people can share the benefits of innovation and technology at home and around the world, as required by the human right to the benefits of scientific progress, which is in Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. When I was invited to assist at the launch of the coalition, which I was really very pleased to do, I was encouraged by its commitment to address this far too little known human right to the benefits of scientific progress. And I reflected at the time on the vital role science plays in realising many other human rights. What I said then, I think, is still relevant today. From ensuring access to clean water, to securing vital vaccines and medicines, to climate justice through adaptation and mitigation to a changing climate, science plays an integral role in protecting rights everywhere. The AAAS coalition is a concrete example of how the scientific research community can reach out to those working on human rights and social development and social justice to make sure that science delivers for the people. The challenge facing us all in Rio in the coming days is to adopt cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary approaches to a text made up of distinct thematic sections. We need to maintain the balance between social, economic and environmental issues, as established 20 years ago, and ensure that science informs our deliberations and that we act to protect and respect human rights. A successful outcome, I believe, will respond to the needs of poor men, women and children rather than to the needs of governments, national, non-governmental organisations and multilateral organisations. Likewise, it should set us on a path to inclusive and equitable sustainable development grounded in human rights and true to the Rio principles. I spent this afternoon, or part of this afternoon, in a press conference of elders and youngers. You know which side I was on, yes? Officially designated an elder, one of the elders of Nelson Mandela. I was together with Dr. Guru Brundtland and President Cardoso, former president of Brazil, who's actually 81 today. It's his birthday. And we were with 4 wonderful youngers from Brazil itself, from Nigeria, from Sweden, and from, where am I leaving out? China. Marvin from China, and we've been linking with them for the last 6 weeks. If you go into the website of the Elders, theelders.org, you'll see this conversation that was taking place. We were trying to bring it together, and of course their passion and also their interest in technology. I mean, they have a very interesting, and they're all about technology for people. I think it gave me hope, actually, to draw on that. But as we spoke, we said there must be no reneging on the Rio principles, including common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. There must be a willingness to build on what we agreed in Rio 20 years ago, not somehow try to dilute it or sort of massage the language so that it loses its significance. Those of you participating here in the ARD Day can ensure that science and technology deliver to their full potential by responding to people's needs and by collaborating with those working to protect human rights and to empower vulnerable communities. In this way, we can meet the challenges of today and tomorrow in the way that those youngers wanted to talk to us about it. As Einstein pointed out, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. We need to think differently. And above all else, I think it's coming through in the discussions and I hope in the final text that in the 21st century, as well as integrating all of the issues that we've been talking about, women's empowerment, women's engagement more and more on a whole range of issues, but notably food and security issues, and removal of the barriers and the discriminations and that sense of second class makes a tangible difference. FAO have calculated it, I'm sure it's been spoken about already at this conference. And it's good that we're now seeing the economic empowerment of women and their contribution economically, as well as the contribution that they make in the home, in their community, in their whatever work that they are doing in their lives, that they have a potential for changing the dynamic. So I hope that that will also be contained in the text. I'm really very happy that our work on climate justice brings us into very close contact with all of you who are working on issues of food and nutrition security, issues of women's empowerment in that context, issues of agriculture which is not just smart but respects the ecosystems and is part of the solution, as was so well put at the beginning. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not a climate scientist. It's actually very energizing at my stage as an elder to be still in a good learning curve. I'm learning a lot, and I've learned a lot from your previous day in Durban, and I'm looking forward to looking at some of the outcomes from this conference, because you are talking about issues that are part of the dignity and rights of everybody, and they are issues that we still haven't solved, but you know better than most what the answers are. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mama Mary Robinson, for that inspiring talk about dignity. We have to make sure that we meet the commitments that were made 20 years ago, but most important, realize that there is no dignity when you are poor, there is no dignity for a mother when the children go to bed hungry. So this is the challenge that science faces, and we have to address this. We have an opportunity to engage with Mama Mary Robinson. I'll open up for questions, comments, reflections, and commitments. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel. I'm coming from Bolivia. And we are working also in a network which is called Climate Change and Justice Working Group. We think that when we are talking about climate justice, it's also a fact of the responsibility that must to assume the developed countries in all this problem as the main responsibles for all this problem since the last two past centuries. And your institution is working, or how is working to try. Do you think it's possible to think that United Nations could establish some legal instrument or a legal structure to make the climate justice more consistent, more? Do you understand me? Some legal instruments that in which the developed countries must to give answers and policies more clear than they, because they are not do it. They didn't do it until today.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Point taken. Any other question, comment? Lady at the back. Please say your name.
Thanks very much. My name is Agnes and I'm with Care International. Today we've been talking a lot about the role of agricultural technologies and innovation and science in the new emergent framework of climate smart agriculture. And we've also very often heard that women comprise a large part of the workforce in agricultural labor. And we've often talked about the need for agricultural research and innovation to be more gender sensitive. But we can also observe that this is not necessarily new and that we've worked on women in agriculture for a while and not much has changed. So I'm wondering what you would see as kind of 2 or 3 of the major breakthrough milestones that are needed in order to bring gender equality into the science and innovation process. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other question? Yes, at the back again. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Christine Chemnitz, Heinrich Böll Foundation, Germany. You said science is delivering up the full scale, and I must admit, looking at the current state of the human rights fulfillment and our ecological systems, I don't fully agree with that. Or I'm not sure about it, at least. Shouldn't we, and my question is, shouldn't we be much more critical on what we already reached and what science delivered to now really manage a transition process to face today's and tomorrow's problems? Thank you.
Thank you. One final one? Yes. Go girls, it's all ladies' time.
My name's Olivia Kaplan. I'd be interested in knowing what growth areas you see in terms of opportunities for youth to engage in climate justice, given that many people of older generations, employers in both the private and nonprofit sectors are reticent to hire and bring on new people to work on climate justice issues.
Thank you. Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you. Well, very interesting and nicely varied questions. First of all, the gentleman from Bolivia on the need for developed countries to take their responsibilities, basically, and how to create a framework where this may be possible. I think that's a very fundamental question. At the conference in Durban, COP17, we did get the Durban Platform for Enhanced Action, but quite notably it didn't expressly contain reference to common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. But they are in the convention, so they cannot be simply disregarded. And I think the climate justice approach would be, how do we now bring them back into the discussion of having a legally binding agreement? There are 3 versions of how binding it would be in the Durban platform, but there was a commitment of all countries to work starting in January this year, so it's already started the process. I know it didn't go very well in Bonn, but we feel that there's a need for a dialogue about climate justice, where many, many voices are heard. And in fact, we broaden the idea of looking for equity beyond mitigation to equity in adaptation issues, equity in finance issues, equity in transfer of technology issues, and also have a lot more thinking from different regions of the world on what equity means. And then we try to get governments to start talking about this, because so far they haven't been willing to talk. And I think that this is the important thing, and hopefully this will help. Where my foundation has entered into an agreement with the World Resources Institute, WRI, to have a dialogue on climate justice over the next couple of years, and a flagship report in 2014 before the 5-year review and other reports which will be focusing more on the science. And I think that this will help to have a much more people-centred approach to issues of common but differentiated responsibilities. The historic responsibility, but then emerging economies are also creating huge problems and will increasingly in the future. I was quite startled when a question was posed at a joint meeting that we had in WRI recently in Washington, and the question was posed to the audience as to whether anybody could answer, if you had this artificial situation where the developed countries, Annex I countries in the past, if they stopped emitting, cut them out of the emissions, how long would it be before we went above 2 degrees Celsius with only emissions from emerging and developing countries? What year do scientists estimate that would happen? And somebody in the back of the room said 2100, but actually apparently it's 2025. Which really startled me. It was a kind of a wake-up call of just how seriously off track we are, and how much we need to be aware of that. Back of the room from CARE International, well, if I may, I'd just like to pay tribute to the work that CARE is doing, and in particular on girls and women's empowerment. And it's great that you're doing so much of that. And you reference the role of agricultural technologies, and what would be the 2 or 3 breakthroughs. I think there won't be the kind of silver bullet breakthrough, because this is not really what we're talking about. I see a breakthrough in the new president of Malawi. Joyce Banda is going to change things in Malawi so fast, and other countries in Africa are going to look at what she's doing. And Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is already giving her sisterly support in what she's doing. It actually makes a difference that we now have 2 elected women presidents in Africa who know what they want for their people. And having listened to Joyce Banda, I've little doubt she has to recover from a bad patch for her country. She's got to renew links with the donor community, and she was busy doing that in Washington. But she has the right idea of bottom-up, community-based, using the local chiefs and getting women right in there in the centre of development, and asking for the training, the extended training to be also available for women, and so on. And I think these kinds of examples of, it's a mixture of political leadership and commitment that is appropriate, that will I think make a huge difference. The question from the representative of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, I didn't quite get the beginning of it. I think you were sceptical about a human rights approach, or no, sorry. But I think whether, given that we have to be critical about how much has been delivered so far, how do we manage the transition process? I think that's what you were saying. Your question, I may not have fully understood it, but your question brought home to me that we are seeing a convergence now between the work under the Human Rights Council and what is happening both here in Rio and in COP17 now, going on to COP18. In other words, the Human Rights Council has acknowledged several times now in resolutions that climate change is having a very negative impact on human rights. A very negative impact on human rights. And recently a new mandate for human rights and the environment to link those two has been created. And that was a significant step, and it was linked also with Rio and with COP18. And the Office of High Commissioner, my former office, has reported much more on these issues. And there is a desire to get the language of human rights more expressly into the text, and we've seen this, and I'm glad to say that in the text that was the revised text that was produced, there is more language in relation to right to food and in relation to women's empowerment, stronger language, and I hope that that remains. I hope also that language on reproductive health remains in the text, and family planning, because these are crucial to sustainable development. So, no system is perfect. The Human Rights Council is not perfect, but I think it's important that it is taking very seriously now the importance of addressing the impacts of climate from a human rights perspective. Olivia, I loved your question about what opportunities there are for young people to engage in climate justice, because in my experience, and I'm talking to a lot of young people, we are actually ordered by President Nelson Mandela as elders to reach out to young people. We never have a meeting anywhere that we don't engage with young people, and we're doing it now here in Rio Plus 20. And I have a sense that, first of all, young people get this issue to a much greater degree because they are more connected with the world. They're connected through social media, they're connected through the knowledge base that they have, the way they communicate, etc. And I think that a good start on talking about climate justice is to start with the injustice. On top of the inequalities already in our world and the failure to protect rights to food and safe water adequately, so we have this horrible situation for a world of 7 billion people. 1/7 of it is hungry. And children are born, you know, it's kind of, I mean, if somebody came down from Mars and wanted to try and understand us, I think they'd be puzzled that 1/7 of the population of the world is suffering from hunger and malnutrition and undernutrition and stunted children who will never recover their full intellectual and physical abilities. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for young people to actually insist that this has to be an issue that is addressed, and find ways that young people are very good at, organising ways, communicating ways, making that viewpoint known with a sense of urgency, that time is running out for the kind of good solutions that will give us a safe world and keep us below 2 degrees Celsius, which has to be quite significantly below. Maybe I should just finish by saying that your question in fact triggered for me being back in Somalia last July. And I say being back in Somalia because I was in Somalia in 1992 as President of Ireland. I was the first president to visit Somalia when there was a food crisis caused largely by fighting warlords. And it was in October 1992, so it was the end of a long dry season, and it had been hard to get the food to the feeding stations in Baidoa and Mogadishu. But I was able to talk to the warlords, both of them. In fact, my husband accused me of poking them in the tummy, but I didn't exactly do that. But I think I did shake a finger or something. But I was pleading with them to let the food go into the feeding stations. When I was back at the request of Irish aid agencies, Concern and Trócaire and Oxfam Ireland, to return to Somalia because of the crisis this past summer, it was in July we were there. In July, the United Nations declared 2 regions of Somalia to be famine regions, and that requires very detailed calculation. We were told that at least 28,000 children had died of hunger, apart from adults, in order for that declaration to be made. And what was never in my mind in 1992, maybe it should have been, but it wasn't, was what was very much in my mind when I was back there in July, that the Horn of Africa has had the 8 hottest years in succession ever measured. And therefore, we know that it won't be 19 years before the next drought. And I know that Ethiopia is better now at coping with periods of drought and better at coping with food distribution. But we know that for the Sahel, for the whole regions, that this is going to have a huge impact. And it's so important for food and nutrition security. So there's an urgency that young people get engaged on these issues and bring their own sense of perspective, advocacy, knowledge, whatever knowledge base they have, and actually not so much wait for somebody to hire them to do it, but create the opportunities, because this becomes an issue that we have to deal with. And so I'm looking more for a kind of leadership by young people. And if you have leadership and clear ideas on it, funnily enough, the work comes along and you find you have a job to do because the issue has to be addressed. So I think the message really is that we have to harness the energy and the capabilities of young people. Again, at the panel I was on last night, somebody spoke on behalf of young people at the panel and spoke in terms of using technologies for people, urban gardens, learning to change habits of consumption, and that we, all aspects of the problem that young people can give leadership on, and all of these would be for us dimensions of climate justice. So I hope that I've encouraged you and that you'll maybe contact about 20 of your friends and start a movement of climate justice from where you are. And I can tell you, there's a lot to be done, and I think it could be a very good future. Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you got the best from the best. Join me in thanking President Mary Robinson for that wonderful overview of where we are, what we need to do, and do it yesterday. Thank you very much.